DLC. When you hear that, your skin kinda crawls for a second. It's a concept that is so monetary and feels so greedy with how companies love to sell you a game that isn't finished and then you need to pay to get the rest of it. But that's not always the case, because out there is an incredible and unique world of DLC. DLC is fascinating with how nearly every game has a completely different roadmap when it comes to how its DLC is planned, along with its purpose showing very bizarrely how well the base game did. DLC can be a cracked reflection of the base game, the direction it goes, shows where the original game succeeded and or where it failed. Whether DLC is acting as a band-aid on a gashing wound or a victory lap for a game that's already in the history books, when we shift our perspective a bit, DLC is easily one of the most fascinating ways to look at a game and see what it truly is and how the DLC either elevates, redeems, or tarnishes a game's legacy. Now let's start off by separating the purposes that DLCs are trying to fulfill into three categories. This doesn't cover everything, but I do think it accounts for a majority of what DLCs are trying to achieve. And the first category we're going to look at is continuation. This is what I think the majority of DLCs are trying to do. Think of games like Spider-Man PS4. These DLCs are basically just trying to give you more of the same, and they're also at the same time not trying to take any huge risks, because this is usually the safest type of DLC, and it also says the most about the quality of a game. If a game is getting a safe continuation of what came before, it's pretty safe to say that the game was already pretty solid to begin with. DLCs, much more than the base games, are targeted in on the people who already like your game. So there's nothing really wrong with this strategy of giving your fans more of what they already like. So look at games like Ghost of Tsushima with Iki Island or Breath of the Wild's DLC. Both of these are pretty decent DLCs, but they also at the same time don't do that much particularly better than the main game, which is what the second category though excels at. And the second category of DLC is expansion. This type of DLC is taking what worked in the base game and trying to build off it for something that can offer gameplay or an experience that exceeds or is just completely different from the base game. From Software is usually a great look at this with their huge towering DLCs that would be another studio's best game on its own, but for them it's just another Tuesday. Or a game like Fallout New Vegas. Each of its 4 DLCs have a completely different tone, setting, and atmosphere, yet they all tonally fit together and are still building off the base game and its systems. DLC though that is truly expansive and does something different can be a lot more risky though, and is usually done with games that are truly loved with built-in fan bases. Since sometimes the experience of the DLC is different enough that they are going to need the core audience to have a little more patience, because at their best, these can be incredible bold choices that already build upon a superb game, or end up as a divisive DLC that splits a fan base onto extreme sides. Let's look at New Vegas again with one of its most famous DLCs, Dead Money, a DLC that changes the core mechanics of the game into a survival horror sequel when the base game is a distinct first-person shooter RPG. The shift is drastic and some love it for that, giving New Vegas a fresh new perspective and tone, while others hate it for saying that it changes the fundamentals of a game they already loved and just wanted more of. Neither is really right and neither is really wrong, but I tend to enjoy these types of expansions more than the continuation type, because these are usually unique and exciting, and even if a game that I love steps into a different genre and it doesn't hit a home run for me, I like to see something different with a game I already love. But the third type of DLC is completion. This is probably the worst type, and that is because this is when a game's DLC is used to fill in the gaps of the base game rather than taking the opportunity to go above and beyond it. When the DLC is focused on completing the game, it really shows more about how the game launched. You see this a lot with fighting games where characters will trickle in to fill in an already weak roster. Yeah, you can buy Mortal Kombat 1 for $70 when it releases, or wait a year and then buy it for $30 with all the DLC that includes Homelander and Omni-Man and Peacemaker. I don't know, maybe I'm just petty, but I feel like those should already be characters that are on the game at release. Those are the characters that casual players want to play as. I don't want to play as Smoke, love you Yuri. Or live service games that are trying to add more content and gameplay to act as a band-aid on a gashing wound. But DLC that is trying to complete a game and smooth out its rough edges isn't always the worst thing if it's not the full primary focus. Because if your DLC is just damage control, at that point you end up might be in a lost cause. But there is one last special category I mentioned at the beginning. The best type of DLC that will end up dipping between these 3 categories and creating something better than all of them combined. And this is the best category of DLC, and that is redemption. And this can only be achieved by games that are critically panned when they are released and written off nearly completely. Games like Cyberpunk 2077, Battlefront 2, and No Man's Sky, where it's clear they were rushed or forced to implement ideas from the studio heads that ended up tarnishing the game's legacy. But the redemption category is incredible when the developers, after everything has been said and they have been made fun of and dragged through the mud, they still end up getting back to work and created a DLC that will change how the game is perceived for years to come. And this is my favorite type of DLC because it's the most heartwarming. I just think from a narrative standpoint, seeing a group of developers after everything still believing in their game and trying to save it is the most wholesome thing. And I know at the end of the day these studios are pulling a Roderick, but when a game genuinely turns around and through DLC is able to completely reinvent the game, that is maybe the best purpose a DLC can serve. DLC is bizarrely one of the best ways that we are able to give games a second chance. And weirdly enough, the best DLC is for games that sometimes have already failed in some aspect. Don't get me wrong, there are incredible games with great DLC, but if you already made a masterpiece that stands on its own, what more do you really want to add to it? The greatest thing a DLC can do is make you see a game in a new light, whether it's through an incredible expansion that just shows you how incredible and deep this world and gameplay were, or in reinvention of a game proving that the game always deserved love the whole time. Because it's a lot harder than you think it is to revive a game, and DLC at its worst shows that maybe there really was a reason that the game was dead on arrival in the first place. But at its best, it can also be what saves it.